this stop, we'll talk a little bit about our work in corn, small grains, soybean, and sorghum. So we're standing here in front of some corn, and this block here is some short-stature corn. We've been working with this one over the past couple of years. This is some of the new genetics that they haven't quite launched in our area yet, but we've been trying to look at these over the past couple of years. And there's one more stop today where I believe Jared will show you some of the population studies. This one's kind of interesting because it doesn't have quite the yield potential as our kind of traditional taller stature corn that you can see beside, but where we kind of make up for that is trying to optimize these populations. But it is interesting, as you increase the population, this corn does tend to get shorter and shorter and shorter. So there's a range of heights that can happen with this one. Like I say, we've been looking at some agronomic interactions. Down at a field where it was a little further to drive to today, we've had a project where we're looking at some of the interactions with cover crop timing. And Jared's looking from a lot of the agronomic side, whereas I'm kind of interested in disease, and especially with gray leaf spot, which is one of our main corn diseases that we see. That tends to start low in the canopy, move its way up over the course of the season, and of course when your ear leaf is located at knee high versus, above my head, that's a lot of extra ground to cover. So we tend to see lower disease in some of our traditional stature corn, and we may have a little bit more to think about as far as fungicide or disease management in some of these short stature corns. Some of the other work that we do is just general fungicide efficacy screening. We do a lot of work with Pythium early season in corn, and Erin, if she wants to raise her hand there, is a newly started master's student that's picking up with some of the work that has been started by previous students working with Pythium early season. And in corn, big one the past week or two, if you've been following along in weekly crop update, is that we have had tar spot confirmed in all 3 counties. Right now, this has mostly been on the west side of every county, very close to the Maryland borders, and everything's been very minimal so far. Very low incidence, and mostly in fields where we're far enough along that we're not anticipating any yield loss from this season. But I know this is one that gets a lot of press. It's one that first started out in the West about 2015, so we're at an advantage if we do have a few years that we can learn from of things that have been happening out west. There's a couple leaves going around. If you haven't had a chance to see this one in person yet, we have them laminated here, so don't worry, you're not going to take it home with you. These are actually from a couple years ago when it first hit in Maryland. Andy collected some, laminated them in Maryland, so that we can kind of use them as a teaching tool to take a look. But it gets this name tar spot because it really is like a piece of tar that's on there. When you scrape your thumb across this leaf, it's not going anywhere. So there's a lot of tar spot lookalikes out there, one of those being bug poop. And I've been in a couple fields over the past week where they were wondering if they had some issues, but it was just some grass from insects that were in there. There are a couple other diseases that can look similar. We don't tend to get a lot of corn rust, but there are stages of corn rust that can look similar to this one. And there's another disease out there called Physoderma that we don't see a whole lot of, but it can have some similarities and be confused as well. So the main thing with this one, if you're out scouting and looking, is you really want to, rub your finger across that lesion, and if it goes anywhere, if it moves, you're probably not dealing with tar spot. This one embeds itself into that leaf, and it's going to be kind of part of that tissue, so it's not going to scrape off. There's a couple other handouts that we'll kind of pass around. I do have some paper copies, but I'll save those when it's drier and you don't get a nice small piece of paper to take with you. But there's a few laminated versions we'll pass around. If you have questions about tar spot, if you have fields where you think you have it or you're worried about having it, feel free to call me. Happy to come out, happy to take a look at samples. This is one, it's not our first year having it. It did show up in Delaware starting in 2023, but the past 2 years we haven't really seen it until October. Pretty much when we're driving in with combines, there have been a couple fields where we've seen it. So it's a little earlier this year, but in most cases, the corn is still made. Yeah, so this particular leaf going around, those ones did not have a fungicide treatment. And as far as fungicides go, what we've learned from the trials that have happened out west, this one's not bad every year. There's going to be years where it comes in a little earlier, that's a little worse. But what they're finding is the same thing we do for gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, is still working for tar spot. The same fungicides are working. That same VT to R3 timing is still working well. And in most cases, one well-timed fungicide is still providing the best return on investment for this one. They've set up a number of trials out west where they've looked at, does it make sense to put something out R3, R4, R5, and yes, you can maybe reduce disease a little, but in most cases you're not changing that yield potential. So the best return is still coming from the fungicide timing we're used to putting out for other diseases. And of course, like every other disease in corn, your irrigated, high population, high production corn is going to be the one that's a little bit more likely to have environmental conditions, the canopy, humidity, some of the things to favor this one. From a environmental standpoint, this one doesn't like when it gets super hot. So, last week actually was with that nice cool reprieve we had, kind of was favoring this one. But in a normal August, when we're nice and balmy and really hot temperatures, this one doesn't seem to like the extreme heat, which I think will, in most years, hopefully play to our favor for this one. Switching gears, we do want to cover just a little bit of the work that we're doing in soybean, and I'm going to pass over to graduate student Irwin to talk about some of her work in soybean and with nematodes.
Hi everybody, my name is Irwin. I'm in my third year as a PhD student under Alyssa. So my research primarily focuses on root knot nematode and corn and soybean rotations. In order to do that, I have a couple different projects. I have a host panel that looks at different agronomic as well as vegetable crops. And the goal with this one is to kind of assess how our reproduction is occurring on our root systems. So a lot of times with our corn and sorghum, we do not see above ground symptoms such as stunting, wilting, or discoloration of plant tissue like we see with other susceptible crops. However, our reproduction is still occurring on our root systems. Another one of my projects is a timing trial that looks at full season beans versus double crop beans. So with double crop beans, we have two different timings. We have planted after barley and then also planted after wheat. This is in combination with the new seed treatment that should be coming out hopefully on the market pretty soon. On top of all this, I have some on-farm trials. One of them is looking, or I guess a couple different fields, are looking at treatment longevity. So we've seen a little bit of issue with our longevity of fumigants. So they go on, kill what they have to, but then anything that's within our root systems is not going to be touched. So kind of looking at hopefully connecting that with some soil metrics and seeing if we can use soil apparent electroconductivity to see where our reproduction rates are going to be highest in certain parts of the field, and then using that to guide some prescriptive management tactics. Moving on from root knot nematode, I also have some projects with soybean cyst nematode. I have some seed treatment trials. I have some in-furrow treatments, and then I also have kind of a branch off of the timing trial. The timing trial is looking at full season beans and then also looking at a barley planting timing. This is also kind of comparing different seed treatments with this new seed treatment that will be coming onto market. Let's see what else. I also have some foliar fungicide efficacy trials. One is a multi-state project that's looking at frog eye leaf spot. This one has a spore trap, addition or aspect as well. So looking at the spread and timing of our highest disease load of frog eye leaf spot. Fortunately for our farmers, unfortunately for our research, we don't have frog eye leaf spot up here, but our hope with this project is that we can see the effects of fungicide use and compare if you need to actually apply a fungicide in these lower disease environments. We also just want to be prepared just in case we do end up seeing a season where frog eye leaf spot is hitting our farmers and hitting our soybeans and causing those yield losses. We want to have those tactics in our back pocket just in case. With that, I want to give a plug for our nematode field day that James mentioned earlier, wherever James is. It'll be right back here on August 28th, so just 2 short weeks away. Come get some food, hang out, listen to more nematode research, and if you guys have any questions, I will be around later on.
Next, I'll introduce master's student Adelaide Mullin, who is working in anthracnose, and she has an interesting split, but she works in sorghum and watermelon, so she'll be jumping back and forth between both tours, but give a little bit of our update in sorghum anthracnose.
Hello. I'm Adelaide Mullin. I just started my second year as a master's student in Alyssa's lab, and today I'm going to talk about some of the sorghum work that I'm doing. So in Delaware, in recent years, sorghum acreage has been increasing, and profit margins in sorghum are extremely tight. The main disease impacting sorghum in the Mid-Atlantic is sorghum anthracnose, and there hasn't been a lot of research done on fungicide efficacy and timing in the Mid-Atlantic since work in Virginia in 2017. So as new fungicides enter the market, we need some updated fungicide efficacy and timing data. Sorghum anthracnose, I have some leaves here, begins as these tan to brown lesions that coalesce and they can cover large portions of the leaf, and they often will have a red kind of ring to them. And foliar symptoms, even if they look kind of severe, it might not necessarily indicate that you need a fungicide treatment, especially since profit margins are so tight. However, infection that gets up into the grain head can sometimes lead to some significant yield losses, as we have seen in some past years. For sorghum anthracnose, environmental conditions are really important. So wet, moist conditions really drive this disease. And last year, as many of you might know, we didn't really have a lot of rain. We were in a little bit of a drought. So we didn't really have a lot of symptoms in the trial that we planted last year. And our main takeaway from that was that when you don't have those conducive environmental conditions, a fungicide spray is not going to be the best management decision and likely will not offer a return on investment. So this year we have two different trials. We have a year 1 sorghum, which is right behind you, and then a year 2 sorghum, which is right down the way. You passed it coming here. And we're looking at with our year 2 to see how disease incidence and severity is increased by that double planting. All the leaves that I have out here today are from our year 2, and I'm not really seeing a lot of disease in our year 1 sorghum so far. So for the trial, we're looking at fungicide efficacy. So we have three different fungicides applied at 2 different timings, boot and flowering. And then we also have 2 different varieties we're looking at. And the current management recommendation is of singular application at flowering is going to give the best return on investment in years when you have severe infection. So we're looking just to get some updated data on that to see if that's still consistent with the 2017 work. And with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer now or after. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adelaide. And just as an aside for Adelaide, she does not like thunderstorms. And this is the second year in a row that it's been thundering while she's given a talk. So it's something with the weather, kind of uncanny. But for those that are growing sorghum, it is pretty neat to walk through and see, the first year, very, very clean. Second year, we're seeing disease. So I know I've spoken with many of you about how I don't recommend often to do the sorghum on sorghum, but I know there's fields where you want to do it because the reason you're planting sorghum is the reason you want to follow it with sorghum. But we'll see from this year. I think we are going to get some good data in that sorghum on sorghum on some fungicide efficacy, and if that might be a way we can kind of get some of those sorghum on sorghum situations and maybe, still get decent yield, but then maybe fit some fields that are a little more difficult and hard to match what you're trying to grow in there. I'll wrap up just real quickly with small grains. So for those that are growing wheat or barley, our big disease that we're always worried about there is fusarium head blight. This past season, we were kind of mid-range. It wasn't non-existent like a couple years ago, but it maybe wasn't quite as bad for some as it was last year. But it was a bit dependent. Some of that variable spring weather conditions, timing of flowering, rainfall, depending on what part of the county and state you were in, did fluctuate on the risk that we saw and the amount of fusarium that happened this year. With that one, again, for anyone thinking about planting small grains, a lot of the management for fusarium in small grains happens before you ever plant. So really taking a look at trying to have something that has partial resistance. We don't have that complete resistance, but there's a lot of good lines out there that can reduce on that grain head. Those resistant ones, there's a single point of infection, kind of limit the amount of spread that's happening on that head. And then the other big one, especially for anyone who's really thinking about malt barley, or if you have some very high value wheat contracts for some of the milling where you really don't have that room for error with the mycotoxin, You know, those of you that are experimenting with early planted soybeans, that's, I think, one that is really an underutilized management tool with our small grains and when we're dealing with the fusarium. If you can plant behind soybean versus corn, you're really setting yourself up into a much cleaner field, because corn is a host for fusarium as well. So unfortunately for us, you know, that rotation of corn into small grain, it fits a lot of our practices we're used to, but it is raising that disease risk that we're seeing for fusarium in small grains. So if you can make it work and try to have a field where you can put it into an early harvested soybean field, I've seen firsthand on a couple research plots in the recent seasons of how much that can reduce your disease level and that dawn level, or the mycotoxin that really is the problem. You know, we can handle a little bit of disease and not have that much yield loss coming from it, but when you start getting into these mycotoxins at high levels, then that really turns the end of the season into a pain. So we'll be around. I do have a couple others from my group that are talking at other tours. We'll be around, but Shiv down there, if wants to wave, it works on watermelon and some Phytophthora diseases there. And then Shem on the end is working in lima beans and some breeding projects. And somewhere on the wagon is Sam, one of our undergrad researchers for the summer. And then Chris, my research and field technician, is somewhere riding along too. So thanks to all of them. Got a really great crew this summer, and try to work hard to solve problems. So please do let us know if there's things that are issues for you that we're not working on, and we will try to get those incorporated in for future seasons. So thank you all.